You know what, mate, you're right about this. I was aware of it, but hadn't really read up on it. And like a lot of situations that come from tragedy or war or other mishap, it's actually a fantastic display of self-sacrifice and valour. Now, the sequence of events that form this story started at 2:55 the previous morning, when the train concerned left Immingham Docks, bound ultimately for White Colne, a small town near Colchester. His first port of call was 89 miles away in March, between Peterborough and Cambridge. Now, the train was formed of 61 wagons and a guards van. The wagons were full of ammunition, ordnance and bombs that were being transported down to Colchester for use by the United States Air Force. In fact, the payload of the train exceeded 500 tons. 500 tons of explosives. Having arrived at March, the train underwent its usual carriage and wagon checks, and the front 10 wagons were detached from the train to be sent on via other locomotives. The train was scheduled to embark on the next leg of its journey to Ipswich at 23:40. It eventually departed at midnight, with driver Benjamin Gimbert at the controls, working alongside his fireman, James Nighthall. An important factor for later on in this story is that analysis of the signal box logs from along the route that the train took show that there was no evidence that the driver had exceeded any speed limits or had driven in any way that would be deemed unusual. The route between March and Ipswich is quite a simple one. At the time, there was single line between Eagly North Junction and Soham, which was worked by token block. Now, the train encountered two more slight delays, one at Eagly and another one at Barway, whilst it waited for another train to come out of the single line. Having been given the token for the single line and permission to proceed, driver Gimbert accelerated his train away from Barway and headed towards Soham. Looking back along the train 4 or 5 minutes later, however, he noticed that the first wagon was on fire. Driver Gimbert was faced with a hellish dilemma. He needed to stop the train in order to separate the burning wagon from the rest of the train, but at the same time that would mean bringing the whole train to a stand in the middle of a small town. If that burning wagon were to cause a chain reaction explosion, it could decimate the local area with untold casualties. Driver Gimbert told his fireman to get off the train and detach the wagon, but did he make it in time to save the town? Good morning, young man. You are indeed living proof that if you ask, you shall receive. This is, of course, part 2 of the story. Go back to my homepage and have a look at part 1 if you didn't catch it when it was dropped. Then come back and join us. Driver Benjamin Gilbert was at the controls of a 51 wagon long train that had been loaded with high explosives and munitions destined for White Colne near Colchester, no doubt for use in the D-Day landings. Having received the token from the signaller, driver Gimbert had taken his train onto a single line that would guide him down through Soham and towards Ipswich, the train's next stopping point. As the train was approaching Soham, driver Gimbert had looked back along the train and had seen that the leading wagon was on fire. With decisiveness, and it has to be said, a disregard for their own safety, the crew brought the train to a steady stand. Driver Gimbert instructed his fireman, James Nighthall, to get off the train, go back and uncouple that burning leading wagon from the rest of the train. The plan was then to pull the train through Soham station and out into open country, where if it did explode, lives would not be at risk. In what seemed like a merciful display of fortune, fireman Nighthall managed to uncouple the wagon with ease and was back on board in just a matter of moments. Driver Gimbert immediately started moving the train forward, slowing to a crawl as he passed through the station so that he could communicate what was happening to the signaller on duty, Frank Bridges. Signalman Bridges had come to the window to talk to driver Gimbert and fireman Nighthall, but before a great deal of words could be said, the bombs inside that leading wagon exploded to devastating effect. Fireman James Nighthall, only 24, was killed instantly. Signalman Frank Bridges survived the initial blast but died in hospital the next day. The driver, Benjamin Gimbert, survived but was badly injured and was in hospital for a number of weeks. Soham station was essentially destroyed. The tracks, signals and platforms were ripped from the ground and tossed around like toys. The explosion caused a crater 66 feet across and 21 feet deep. Over 700 houses were destroyed or damaged within 900 feet of the explosion. The house of sub-ganger W. Adler, who worked on the track, was also partially destroyed. He was awoken by the explosion, and his wife and daughter were trapped in the wreckage. Having rescued them, his next thought was to attend the scene as quickly as he could and give assistance to colleagues who were dealing with a nightmare incident. Given the importance of the load, it didn't take long for people to ask, how could this have happened? It's the 2nd of June 1944, and just days before the launch of Operation Overlord at Normandy, a train carrying hundreds of tons of highly explosive ordnance destined for use by the US military was making its way from March to Ipswich. The driver of the train, Benjamin Gimbert, had reacted decisively when he found out that the leading wagon was on fire. He brought the train to a stand near Soham station and told his fireman, James Nighthall, to go back to the leading wagon and detach it from the rest of the vehicles. The plan was then for the train to be pulled through Soham station into open country, where the risk to life and property would be much diminished. Before that task could be completed, however, the wagon and its contents exploded, destroying the station and damaging 700 houses within a 900 feet radius. Driver Gimbert had been seriously injured. His 24-year-old fireman, James Nighthall, had been killed instantly, and the signalman on duty in Soham Station signal box, Frank Bridges, had been critically injured in the explosion as well. How did this happen? Was it the result of a hot axle box, improper maintenance, or substandard ordnance that was being carried by the wagons? As detailed into the government report into the incident, driver Gimbert was unable to be interviewed for 7 weeks due to his injuries. At a critical point in the war, the government needed answers, but more than that, they needed the railway to be open and running as soon as humanly possible. Believe it or not, that feat was accomplished in just 18 hours. Despite the near total destruction of Soham Station and the making of a crater over 60 feet across, the line was open within 18 hours for freight traffic and for passenger traffic the very next day. With the assistance of the US Army, the railway had been restored to running order in astonishingly short time. And now, the opportunity arose to find those answers as to what exactly caused this horrendous explosion. When driver Gimbert was eventually fit to be interviewed, his memories and recall of the events were clear and connected, in the words of the investigating officer. He accurately and clearly described his own actions and the actions of his colleagues, and quite interestingly, also confirmed that he'd seen blue flames coming from the wagon. Meanwhile, Guard Clark had said that he was sure that the flames were yellow, i.e. burning normally. The theory was that the blue flames may have been caused by sulfur powder, which had previously been carried in that wagon. Whilst no firm cause was identified, driver Gimbert and fireman Nighthall were awarded the George Cross. And as for the trainload of bombs, well, that's all history.